So apparently, Republicans are the party and the people who are for massive deficit spending. We'll break down that and more in this episode of Saving the Republic.
Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots at Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard round the world? The martyrs of history were not fools. And our honored dead, who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis, didn't die in vain. Where then is the road to peace? Well, it's a simple answer after all. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay, there is a point beyond which they must not advance.
Welcome back to Friday's edition of Saving the Republic. As always, yours truly, Joe Staten, hosting the show, but also joined by our friend Mark Rogers from the Voice of College Football here today. And we're going to be discussing something that I think should be at the forefront of our viewers' minds and should be at the forefront of voters' minds. And that's going to be this whole fiasco that is unfolding before our eyes and that of this spending bill in front of Congress. So before we get into that, Mark, how is your week going? How is the prep for Christmas coming?
The week's going pretty well. I just booked a flight to go see my two wonderful kids for Christmas. So I'll be arriving early Christmas Eve and then staying about a week. So that made me very happy to navigate at least the travel plans and the ticket selection, because when you schedule at the last minute, you can imagine what most of the prices looked like. So we were able to get a decent deal on that. But this news doesn't certainly make me happy in regard for a lot of reasons. But in the immediate, I'm connecting long lines possibly at the airport to a government shutdown.
Oh, man. Yeah. I didn't even think about that with TSA. Hopefully this doesn't affect that. But I think so. Before we get into the spending bill, maybe a more important question. Last week we asked favorite Christmas movie. This week I'm gonna throw another Christmas question your way without any prep. Any favorite Christmas memories? Anything stick out to you?
Did you in fact ask me my favorite Christmas movie? I know we started down the path of the Christmas cranks and all sorts of nonsense, which certainly my kids have loved and we've embraced as they've grown up. And now it's almost kind of a cult classic to a certain extent. But the best Christmas movie of all time is It's a Wonderful Life. And I know that's corny. I know that's generic. I know that's just kind of a placeholder default. But if I'm going to watch one Christmas movie and make that an almost, it's not like it's a tradition, but it's basically one, I do get to it each and every year, would be It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, that movie, as a kid, I watched it and I remember watching and saying, wow, this looks like it was made in like, I don't know, the 1920s or 30s or something, but it's still
40s. Yes.
Okay. 40s. Okay. I didn't know that. So, but it captures your attention and it's the message behind the movie. But Mark, the question was not only movie, but Christmas memory. Anything stick out to you? Anything with that movie particularly?
Well, what stands out to me is how we used to spend Christmas in regards to Christmas Eve, starting in Christmas Eve, and just the mood that my mom in particular was able to create with just making sure that the house was decorated to a T. She's a very fashionable lady, and making sure that, yes, the house was trimmed up to a T. And of course, that preparation went on for weeks. And not in an expensive sort of way. You know, it could have been very cheap items, but she did her best. And the baking, the cooking, the preparation of a very nice meal, usually something along, the beef stroganoff or roast beef or some type of meal like that. And then just a lot of fudge and my favorite cookies and chocolate chip cookies and all of that prepared. And then my mom was an exceptional pianist, and she would sit down. We would watch some Christmas shows, and then she would sit down and we would sing Christmas carols. And I don't want to overplay my family as being some musical gifted family. It's not, but we're somewhat musical. Everybody's been in choir and so forth. The least of me, I would be the least of all of that. But we would just hang out around the piano for an hour and a half and sing Christmas carols. And that was part of our Christmas tradition in addition to reading the Christmas story. So then I kind of carry that minus the musical portion of that because I can't play one note on any instrument, but carry that on with my children in terms of watching our favorite Christmas shows. Some of the ones we mentioned last week, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Santa Claus is Coming to Town, watching all those favorites, kind of selecting a few each night after a nice meal. And then, having plenty of junk food. We're all chocoholics, and reading the Christmas story. So it's kind of carried on what my mom instilled in us.
I was going to say, so the musical background sounds like you want to perform some carols for us on the show today.
No, I don't think you want that. If you want viewership to tank and you're ready to sabotage the show, I'm ready, Joe.
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. But okay, so one last question on that end too. Were you guys a real tree family, or would you get a fake Christmas tree?
Real trees. Always real trees.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts personally. Was we would get a real tree most years. But I just love the smell of the Christmas tree. And I just remember sweeping up the pine needles for you don't want to have a fire hazard. And we'd have some of the older Christmas lights, which were less, I would say, I don't know, fire safe. I don't know if that's the right word, but
yeah.
The plugins weren't as protected. Some of the plastic was stripped off, but it was just so bright and beautiful. And it's kind of like the whole talking about politics. There's this whole movement away from like the incandescent bulb and everything. So before all the LED lights came out, we'd have these, the beautiful bright lights. I'm sure you remember yourself.
I'm sure.
Yeah, just I personally, Christmas is my favorite holiday. Not only just for the festivities, but obviously the meaning behind the holiday. And yeah, that movie you mentioned too. Again, that movie sticks out to me too because of the message. I think everybody should just try if you can this year to step back, take it in, enjoy the holiday. It's why I wanted to open up the show this way, because the next topic may not be as fun to talk about. Okay, so but we have to talk about it because it's gonna affect you, and that's what we do here. So just to break down, just to give a brief overview of what's occurred in the past, I don't know, 48 hours. So we've had a spending bill that was introduced to Congress. Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled this 1,400 plus page bill and gave Congress less than 24 hours to review this, which is, just for all those who are keeping track, 1,450 pages is longer than most versions of the Bible. So if you can sit down and read your entire Bible in less than a day, please sign up and be a congressman, because apparently you need to have that skill set. But you might ask yourself, okay, that our typical spending bill is this length. Why is this a problem, et cetera? And the issue is that we've had this come up in several previous years. And being somebody who's followed the political scene and the flow of the legislature federally, this is a common practice. And the budget bills end up being something where everybody wants their pork. Everybody, all the lobbyists want their piece. This is where they slip in their requests. This is where everybody puts in their money, their slivers of millions of dollars. Because when we're talking federally, the budget is so massive that $10 million is not really anything. So we have a lot of money that is just people are pulling from. So we had this bill, and Mike Johnson previously came out and said this year earlier, he said, we are not going to have a Christmas omnibus. We're not going to have a continuing resolution, which is what these are called, these short-term fixes to keep the government funded, which are then used as vehicles to shove all this horrible legislation down everybody's throats because nobody can review it, et cetera, et cetera. So Mike Johnson said, we're not going to have one this year. Well, guess what? We had one. And he went on Fox News. I put it on the show yesterday. For all those who haven't seen it yet, go check it out. But the clip of Mike Johnson on Fox News basically saying, look, I'm a fiscal conservative. We have a slight majority. I'm basically, my hand was forced here. We have to do what we have to do. I don't have a choice, et cetera. And funny enough, when President Trump, Elon Musk, and the whole, I would say, Maha crew caught light of this situation, they put on the pressure, right? I don't know if you followed this, Mark, but Elon Musk began tweeting. Everybody began saying, whoa, what's going on here? The bill itself had several provisions in it that I will now share on the screen regarding, essentially, I would say, trying to sabotage to a certain degree some of President Trump's main agenda items. We had limitations on RFK's ability to do things as Secretary of HHS. We had Congress getting $70,000 of a raise. We had, new biolabs that were going to be funded. We had vaccine, infrastructure for vaccine passports, mask mandates, et cetera. The inability to subpoena members of Congress for the January 6th committee. So I guess just initial thoughts, Mark. I mean, I know, this whole topic of a omnibus bill can be a little bit overwhelming if you haven't researched it before, but just any opening thoughts on how this whole process went?
So my thoughts go back to, first of all, rallying conservatives to stand firm on the conservative agenda, the conservative movement, the conservative policies, and the initiative, because I don't consider myself necessarily a Republican. Is that how I vote? Yes, that's how I vote. But there's a separation in regards to, I would hope that we can still be cognizant of the legislation, the policies that are being pushed by certain factions of the Republican Party, and we can be cognizant and not blindly support Republican congressmen and politicians. So that's one thing there, just to be able to not be so partisan that you're blind to just, your own thought process in analyzing what's going on in any particular situation. Now, with me, I've always been part fascinated, part confused, part disgruntled by the whole national debt issue. And I think this is something that's extremely difficult to grasp for the average American. What is the national debt? What does this truly mean? How does it harm us? It's like this mythical figure that, well, we've been in debt forever. It hasn't hurt us. Well, we don't know how much it's hurt us, but it doesn't seem like it has. Therefore, what's the big deal? We just owe ourselves, in a sense. And so what does this truly mean? And then you start to dig a little bit deeper. And I am in no way an economist, nor do I pretend to be able to figure out or go and shoot. Even economists are split in regards to the ramifications that we suffer from the continuance of debt in terms of interest rates, inflation. I think what's really hurt us globally is obviously a weakened dollar. That's my biggest concern, is how the dollar's been weakened and continues to be weakened. And to your point, unless somebody wants to fact check me, you included, who know much more than I do, that the debt has escalated further and much more under Republican power than under the Democrats, unfortunately. So that's one place I have to call out, where I've placed my vote. And I just think the massive amounts of production in this country and the usually healthy GDP has been the counter impact that has kept us afloat and kept us basically prosperous throughout generations. Otherwise, we would be paying dearly for this massive debt that seems to be out of control and almost, I don't want to say irreversible, but irreversible to the point of where do we get a handle on it? Because of course the interest is at such a rate that it's massive. And then the one note that you showed from that tweet that hits me when you mentioned RFK is just the efficiency, obviously, that in the proposal that Elon Musk and RFK and that task force and them putting that together, this is something that we want to see executed to its fullest extent, because that completely fights against and will negate a lot of the waste and a lot of the corruption that that has contributed to this debt through generations.
Yeah. So now that you mentioned that, I think is a good point to talk about and go into a little bit more. So yeah, after this bill was dropped, and apologies for not getting into this for the viewers initially and the whole breakdown of what happened, but there was another bill introduced after the cascade of criticism came out on social media from Elon Musk and from Vivek, there was a 116-page bill introduced compared to the 1,400-page bill. And that bill basically cut out all this random spending they had in there. They had hundreds of millions of dollars going to like LGBTQ teaching and these just strange, again, every congressman wants their bit, every lobbyist wants their bit. So all these random requests that we do not need to spend money on, they were cut out of the bill. And, the bill still did raise the debt ceiling. That's why some Republicans actually voted against it, like Chip Roy. But the bill was put forth. This much more trimmed version of it was put forth, and it still failed. 38 Republicans voted against it, which, to be honest, understanding the whole situation, President Trump said he's going to cut spending by hundreds of billions of dollars in his first term. So I personally trust that he's going to deliver on that based on his past results. And based on that, I would vote yes for this bill as a Republican, which is concerning to me. Like you said, Mark, I have no loyalty to that name. I have a loyalty to my principles. And it seems more and more the way that we see politics and the way we see our representatives act, many Republicans don't act like Republicans. It's just, I try to highlight that as much as I can, because talking about why this matters for our viewers, you need to understand if your representative is a Republican and they're not acting like it, that's somebody that we should vote out. That's somebody that we should primary. That's somebody that you should look up your representative and see who they are and see how they vote on these things, because in the past, they just are able to live off of our ignorance and naivety, right? And you didn't have an Elon Musk in the past basically stopping a massive spending bill that would add to the deficit and the debt, which is incredible that we're living in this world. I'm just, at first, in one, on the one hand, I'm very grateful that we have this new visibility and awareness of how politics operates, because it's driving us off a cliff. And then the fact that you brought up the national debt, I'm going to put this on the screen here. Let's see. This is the U.S. national debt to GDP ratio. And you talk about why it matters. For a long time, we have been able to get away with this and say, oh, the debt doesn't matter because our economy is so large. But as you can see here, our debt to GDP ratio has eclipsed 120%. Historically speaking, many countries who get past that 150% mark is when you start seeing trouble. Greece, their entire economy collapsed when they approached 200% GDP, debt to GDP, and we are fast approaching that number. And, I love the fact that you mentioned that, because that's something our viewers need to understand as well, is what are the true effects of deficit spending? Why does this all matter? The national debt, essentially, when the government spends money they don't have, what they are doing is they're printing money, and they are devaluing your money as a voter. They're devaluing your money as a citizen, and that is what causes inflation. I think there's a lot of confusion about inflation. What is it? Energy? Is it supply chain? Is it, we hear all these things, but at the end of the day, what it is the government printing money they don't have and devaluing your money, which is essentially a tax. And not only is it a tax that you didn't vote for, that they didn't vote for, that they just forced on you as a citizen, it's also discrediting our country. So at the same time, we are being taxed and our country is being discredited globally. So I think the national debt, and Elon Musk talks about this all the time, it is the paramount issue that we are facing as a nation. This will cripple us. This will, take away our standing on the world stage, as we have seen that, the US dollar, we've yet to default on any debt, the United States as a country. That's why we have such a great reputation, even though that's kind of interesting to say that out loud and hear myself say that we have a great reputation with how things have gone recently. So Mark, given these developments and given how the spending bill kind of was handled, the Republicans voted against it, which was pretty frustrating and disappointing for me to witness. There's rumors now that they're going to split up the bill into separate provisions. So, they're going to vote on each individual increase in spending so that there's, less controversy, which could be a good thing. But I mean, how do you see this developing? And I guess how would you assess how this all has gone down, given how the Republicans have responded?
Well, I wanted to, first of all, highlight the number that you just raised with the 120% ratio of the GDP versus the national debt. And once that crossed 100%, it was sometime during the pandemic. It was around 98% when the pandemic hit, and our mismanagement of the pandemic and wasting money in many directions just escalated that. So if you know anything about math, folks, when it goes from 98% to 120% in 4 years, that's a massive surge. And then it's just going to continue. Obviously, it's a self-fulfilling issue with the interest spiraling and exponentially increasing. So it becomes more and more a problem as it, there are websites where you can just click on the national debt and just watch it just spin, and just how it's going up by the second. And then the other thing was, and I know this is a completely opposite direction, but you talked about the voting of what are not conservatives, but are by name Republicans, and the disappointment in how they are leading and pushing legislation. Well, that's almost reflective, I think, of a positive that we just saw in the national election, was that President Trump won a popular vote. However, in doing so, there obviously is a lot of movement among liberals that are dismissing the far left woke, whether that be from a social standpoint, probably, and they have fairly reasonable, uh, thoughts and approaches to life otherwise, that they're coming to our side. However, they're going to bring, a certain, they're gonna suppress a lot of, values in that direction. So that's kind of the pros and cons of gaining that popular vote, I think, in terms of the mindset of the population, but also how that permeates into the politicians themselves, and whether they're responding to what they think their constituents want and will get them reelected, or whether they're part of that whole swing in ideology. Whichever it is, it's probably a combination. That's kind of the downside of what we've seen in regards to that election.
Yeah, and just real quick too, you're talking about this growing coalition of you would call them disaffected liberals, people who I would say, by their own words, we've talked about in the past, and even a guy like Bill Maher, he'll never admit it. I think he's a little bit too prideful and stubborn in his own ways to ever switch at this point. But if we're being honest, if you listen to Bill Maher talk, he's not a modern Democrat. Like, the dude is at the very least a centrist, at the very least. If not, he, probably would vote Republican if he was being honest with himself. But like the Anna Kasparians of the world, Jillian Michaels, the people we've seen shift, even Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks has been coming out several times. I've mentioned it now because I see it almost every day. He's coming out like realizing more and more how crazy the left has become. But these people who are shifting, there is a broad coalition of people coming together and realizing like, okay, hey, we all agree on like freedom of speech. We agree on secure borders. We agree men should not be in women's sports. We agree that, we should not just spend ourselves into oblivion, and we should have control of our spending in DC. And so that's a good question for you, Mark. And that's a good way to kind of wrap up this show, is like, how do you see these next 4 years going in terms of how could this new administration, how could this new growing movement of people, including our viewers, how could it change the future of politics given this growing visibility? I mean, X has really become the media, if we're being honest. Like, the breaking news in the world happens on a social media website, and it's not the legacy organizations know their time is coming to an end. They admit it, they recognize it. So how do you see these next 4 years potentially changing? I know we've talked about it before, but in terms of even the national debt, how do you see this growing coalition and this President Trump's new administration maybe changing the course of our country?
Well, it's a coalition, and it's a government structure, and a set of ideologies coming together that are somewhat diverse when you start to bring over the RFKs and the Tulsi Gabbards from what used to be a liberal position. So I think that that's actually a strength. I'm very impressed with those two individuals, for one thing. So I think that if it's executed correctly, it's the best of both worlds. And I don't mean to be Pollyanna about it, because that's certainly not my view on most things. I'm a skeptic when it comes to any kind of government initiative and the execution, because we hear a lot of good rhetoric, but we do have a president who I don't have total faith in anyone except Jesus Christ, but a great amount of faith in, more than any president that's ever taken office. And I was a big George W. Bush fan at that point. My viewpoint of his presidency and him as an individual has lessened through the years, but I have a lot of faith in Trump and what he will accomplish and his power of influence. And then he seems to have surrounded himself with people that will not bow to him. I believe they're strong individuals that will push back when he's maybe going off on some kind of tangent or acting in a way that's not taking all things into account. So I think it's a healthy coalition, if that's what we're going to call it, in regards to at the top, Vivek Ramaswamy. Extremely impressed with that guy. I can't believe how many accolades I'm giving to politicians, because that's usually not like me. This is the most impressed I've ever been of what is forming as a cabinet. I don't know if that really answers your questions, because I don't know where they're going to take this. I believe that we have the best chance of them fulfilling their promises, and the one that, of course, excites me the most is the Vivek Elon Musk coalition,
Doge.
RFK, all of that, in terms of the efficiency of the government and cleaning that up, both from the inefficiency standpoint and the corruption standpoint, and which will immediately address what we're talking about with the debt.
Yeah, and what I see, what I see from this cabinet is I see a diverse way of thinking, a diverse group of opinions and even policy positions. For example, RFK Jr. during the campaign said he was in favor of abortion up to the point of birth. Okay, this is not a conservative. I mean, it is what it is. He's not a conservative guy. He did walk that back, but Tulsi Gabbard, I would say, is pretty liberal on abortion. So these are people that, yeah, they're not conservative in every single way, but they have some very important points of agreement. Very important principles. I would personally say abortion is very important to me. Like, that should be something that's common sense, in my opinion. But other than that issue, they have a lot of common sense. And it's kind of the way that the founders envisioned the nation being run, is that we all do have a common fabric. In the words of Governor John Winthrop, the Massachusetts Bay Colony speech that we mentioned on Thanksgiving, the common fabric that holds us together. But we also have federalism that allows us to say, look, the values that we are going to die for, our freedom of speech, our national sovereignty, our freedom of religion. These are the issues that matter. The other issues, federalism, right? That's what the president says about abortion, for example. Now, principally, would I say that's the best stance necessarily in abortion? Maybe not, but at least we have a way to kind of disperse those different viewpoints we don't agree on, leave it to the voters. But the main points we can, have a cabinet, have an administration that will be run efficiently and really be run for the people. And that's the difference here, Mark, is you mentioned George W. Bush. Even, a lot of people probably, my dad was a big George W. Bush fan, but in the matter of 20 years, a lot has been revealed about the way politics was running even back then, and the way Republicans actually act behind closed doors and the things they vote for, that have made us all realize, wow, maybe that person did not have my best interest at heart. Maybe he wasn't the person he seemed to be. So I think it's a common sentiment, but I think we have a lot of hope. I like ending these shows like this. I feel like it's a common message, but we have encouragement right now. We have hope as a country, as Americans, and I think we're seeing a rejuvenation of some of these values that we should all support and fight so dearly for. So again, always on Fridays, Mark Rogers from the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you joining the show. Programming wise update, I've told you guys several times, I'm going to keep hammering it over your head again and again. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday from here on, next several months, we'll come to you 3 times a week. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. But again, Mark, thanks for joining the show today. Have a very Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Joe, to you and your family. And can't wait to get back on here and continue this series.